Welcome to Malifaux University. 105. Measuring distance and horizontal movement. Distance in Malifaux is measured in inches. As mentioned before, you'll need a small ruler or measuring tape in order to play. The two-player starter box comes with two faction-themed measuring widgets, so that's a good way to get some models and the tools you need to play. There are some games out there where if you measure distance, it counts as your move and you'll have to follow through. In Malifaux, you're encouraged to pre-measure before you decide on an action to make sure you'll actually be in range for that action. Just don't use measuring as a stalling tactic. That's bad sportsmanship. When you measure distance from a model to an object, measure from the closest point of the model's base to the closest point of that object on the table, even if it's a piece of terrain that doesn't have a base. If you're measuring between models, measure from the closest point of the base of the model to the closest point of the base of the target model. For example, Fuhatsu is targeting the doppelganger with his Gatling gun, which has a 12-inch range. He measures from his base to hers, and the distance between them is only 11 inches. He may fire. If any part of the base of the model you're targeting is within the range of the attack or ability you're trying to use, then the model is in range. This is why keeping models on their listed base sizes is so important. Many models have arms, weapons, and other bits that extend well beyond the edges of their bases. You don't measure to the model. Measure from base to base at all times. Sometimes, a game effect will say the target must be completely within a certain range. When that happens, you measure to the far side of the target's base. If any part of the base is outside that distance, it's not in range. For example, Anya Lycarian's Bleeding Edge signature action says she gets to make a scheme marker completely within range. The range of this action is 6 inches, so we measure from the closest point of Anya's base in the direction she wants to place the marker. The outer edge of that scheme marker cannot be outside that 6-inch range, but she can place it anywhere within that 6 inches. To keep your games friendly, if your measurement is close to being in range or out of range, ask your opponent to measure and verify. If he agrees with your measurement, then you're in business. If the distance is still in question, get a third opinion and go with it. Base contact is a term frequently used in this and other miniature warfare games. In Malifaux, it means the bases of two models or objects are literally in contact with one another. If their bases are overlapping, such as when a model is standing on top of a remains or scheme marker, that also counts as being in base contact. If it is not possible to actually make base contact because of the sculpt of the model, but it would otherwise legally happen, place the models as close as possible and make sure your opponent understands that the models are in base contact for all intents and purposes. If you can, perhaps rotate the models so the pointy bits are facing away from each other and the bases can make contact. The directions the models are facing matters in some other miniature warfare games, but not in Malifaux. Also note that base contact is used for models and other models or objects. A single model is not in base contact with itself. I'll take a brief moment now to thank all those who were patrons at the time this video was made, especially Mats by Mars, Sergey, Tom, Alan, Jason, Jeremy, Mikulai, Oleg, Tomas, and Travis, and many more at the free student tier. Your support is essential to bringing these videos to life. Now that we know how to measure distance, let's discuss the different ways your models can move around on the table. Walk is a general action all models can take, which allows the model to move around the table. When you want a model to walk, check its speed stat. Unless an ability or token affects this number, this is how many inches the model can walk in a single action. Wildcard Jacob Lynch's speed stat is 5, so he can walk up to 5 inches. While this version of Jacob Lynch has a speed stat of 5, Dark Bet Jacob Lynch has a speed stat of 6. Always check the card and don't rely on memory. For a model to walk, measure from the outside of its base in the direction you want it to go, then move the model up to its speed stat in inches, with that same point on its base not going any farther than that. You can break up the walk action into smaller segments in order to get around terrain and other models, but you cannot break it up to take another action. such as walk 2 inches, shoot an enemy model, and then finish the walk action. You move the model up to its maximum speed stat, and then it stops. That's one action. When models in Malifaux get close to one another, we say they are engaged, which usually means they can hit each other. In previous editions of Malifaux, different models had different engagement ranges, so be patient with some players who may still remember it the old way. No matter how big the model or what their attack ranges are, every model in 4th edition has a 1-inch engagement range. Now, why does that matter? If your model is engaged by an enemy model and declares the walk action, your speed stat is cut in half for that action, rounded down. Dark Bet Jacob Lynch's speed would become 3 if he walked away from engagement, while Wildcard Lynch's speed would drop to 2, which is half of the usual 5, and rounded down. We'll talk more about the effects of engagement in a later video. Normally, you cannot change elevation without taking the walk action. With only a few exceptions, if the game effect you're using says to move a model, that model needs to pretty much stay on the same level. If the terrain you're using has stairs or hills with sloping sides, just about any movement can go up and down these features with no problem, even without the walk action. Vertical movement, like climbing, is discussed in the next video. Toward and away are special words. Some game effects, actions, and abilities will require a model to move toward or away from another model or object, which will usually be a marker or a piece of terrain. When this happens, the player controlling the movement chooses a point on the base of each model or object. Then, that player moves the model so that those 2 points wind up closer or farther apart as appropriate. The movement can be broken up into segments to get around other models or objects. The only catch is that if the 2 points are supposed to get closer, they're not allowed to get farther apart during the movement, and if they're supposed to get farther apart, they're not allowed to get closer during the movement. While there are plenty of models that move models toward things, game effects that move models away are pretty rare, so let's look at toward since they're 2 sides of the same coin. The Beckoner has successfully cast Lure on Mancha Roja. This attack will cause him to move his entire speed stat toward the Beckoner. The 10 Thunders player picks a spot on the base of each model. Those 2 spots now must wind up as close as possible. The 10 Thunders player now controls the movement and moves the gremlin around the rock, stopping when he reaches his 6 inches, since his speed stat is 6. If there were a low wall between the Beckoner and Mancha Roja, he would not be able to climb over it, since vertical movement usually requires the walk action, and this lure attack says Mancha Roja moves his speed stat, but does not take the walk action. He also could not go around the wall, because even though he would wind up closer at the end of his movement, going around in either direction would move him farther away from the Beckoner when he's supposed to be moving toward her. This lure action could also be used to move Mancha Roja around the Beckoner, depending on the points the 10 Thunders player chose. If he chose this spot on the front of the gremlin and this spot on the back of the Beckoner, Mancha Roja would move around the Beckoner until those 2 spots were as close as possible, which might open up line of sight or other possibilities for the Beckoner. An important modifier to toward and away rules is the word directly. If a game effect says a model moves directly, it's not allowed to move around other models or objects at all. You draw a line between the 2 objects and move the one along that line. You can move friendly models through one another, but if your model hits an enemy model or a piece of impassable terrain, it just stops there. You can see this on the Arcane Fate Emissary's Arcane Rush tactical action. This creates a 2-inch pulse centered on the emissary. Enemy models in that 2-inch range which do not discard a card are moved 3 inches directly away from the emissary. Let's say the emissary does this here, with these 3 mindless zombies in range. The Resurrectionist player doesn't want to burn 3 cards from his hand on these guys, so the Arcanist player picks points on the base of all the models and moves them along that line. The first one goes unimpeded 3 inches. The second one goes 2.5 inches and would stop overlapping another zombie, so stops short of that. The third one is already up against a crate, so doesn't physically move, but this still counts as having moved for the rest of this action. The action says they all need to make defense duels or else suffer damage, so the Resurrectionist player must now do that for each of the 3 zombies. Other game effects will use the term place. When a model is placed, it is picked up off the table and set down within the range specified. It does not count as having moved through or around any object or model between where it started and where it winds up. Place effects are cool because you can get a little more range out of them than you can normal movement. In a place, you measure from the front of your model's base like normal, but you get to put the backside of the base on that point. Take a look at this Archivist model. This creepy dude has a dust and cobwebs tactical action that makes a web marker within 6 inches. We'll discuss triggers in another video, but if he gets a mask when he does this action, he can place himself anywhere within 4 inches. He gets to measure out 4 inches and then place the backside of his base at that 4 inches or anywhere up to that distance. Just be sure to measure before you pick up your model. The final way of moving around is the charge action. This is a special 2-part general action that lets you move your model and then take a melee attack action if you want to. A couple of restrictions are that you can do this only once in an activation, and you cannot do it if you are engaged by an enemy model. You move in a straight line up to your speed stat, and you can't use this to go up or down terrain except for stairs and hillsides, because that wouldn't be in a straight line. You don't have to go directly at another model, though, so you can definitely angle your movement to get past terrain or another model. Once you finish the movement part of the charge, you may take a melee action if you have a target nearby, but you don't have to. Let's see this in action. A game is underway with an infamous crew and a nightmare crew. Mancha Roja decides to charge Coppelius, who is standing next to one of Captain Zip's piano markers. They're currently about 8 inches apart, which would mean Mancha Roja could move in, but would still be out of range for an attack. But he's ready for this. Mancha Roja's speed stat is 6, and he has the Rush ability that gives him another 2 inches when he charges. The infamous player moves the big gremlin 8 inches toward Coppelius, ending within an inch of him. The rules of charging state that if he is going to take an attack after his movement, Mancha Roja must make a melee attack, as signified by the claw marks next to its range. Knowing that Coppelius has the Terrifying ability, which puts a negative modifier on Mancha Roja's attacks, the infamous player opts for the Takedown attack. Since Coppelius is within an inch of the piano marker, Mancha Roja gets a positive modifier which cancels out the negative modifier. The 2 players can then play out the attack as normal. When it's all said and done, Mancha Roja will have used one of his possible actions since the melee attack was generated by the charge action and doesn't count against his action limit. He can still take one more action, which very well could be the takedown attack again, and his signature action if he qualifies for it. That's the overview of measuring distance and horizontal movement. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargames Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new long-form content. And be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.